I'm Quan Tracy Cherry, and I'm representing Ourrawmaterial with two of my favorite people. It's the summer of 2022 session, and we begin every Ourrawmaterials with mentors. I have my mother, Dr. J. Cherry Mohanji, with me, and my son, Jelani Ayodele Cherry Rooks, with me, and we're here to talk about mentors, those people who've affected us in our early childhood. And you, when we started talking about this, you had a question as, does a mentor have to be a person? And would you just give us some flow over there, doctor?
Detroit, for me, was electric. And I suppose the language at the time might have been, from reading other sources, it might have been called a boom town. But everything was happening. Everything. There was enough money. There was enough jobs. My father even had, as I remember, had a 1936 rumba seat Ford with the rumba seat in the back.
Mm-hmm. And what's the rumba seat?
Well, you could sit at least one person back there. It was in the back. Mm-hmm. And they're cute as pie. And if you would go out to Greenfield Village, which is in Detroit, you would see them. And we had them. And that's because we could afford them. Mm-hmm. And for me, Detroit was everything. You could see lights, and you could see action, and you could see people talking, and we didn't have an internet, so we had to talk to each other. And we had magazines. So yes, the city was electric, and I think about it, and it fell into ruins, but not at that time. And we had a gym that was named after later Joe Louis, and we knew he trained there. And so he was the, bomber? The brown bomber.
Brown bomber.
Yeah.
Brown bomber.
And I later, I'm very good friends. One of my very good friends is one of his niece. And I hear stories about him coming up and all of that. So it was the city. It was the Harlem of, that later when you got the Harlem Renaissance. But this was working class people who, many of them I'm sure who were in the factories who were probably illiterate.
Mm-hmm. And you're talking about Henry Ford,
right?
Hired blacks,
but only blacks.
And your father worked,
right?
And then your mother was in education. My grandmother.
Well, from the South, but when
she
came there, she had to be a maid in Detroit because they wouldn't take. She was a traveling teacher in the South. Mm-hmm. There were no credentials that a black woman could take at that time, so she was a maid when she got to the.
But that didn't stop her from being interested in
no,
Marcus
because
Garvey
she passed.
Or you even mentioned Mary McLeod Bethune too.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. So it was passed on directly, and I could hear her talking to her girlfriends. That's what we knew. They sent us out the room, but that's how we learned about everything.
So the older women would send the younger women out of the room because they had important business to discuss.
Right. We had, how to make that man do right.
So that's a mentoring, and informal but formal, or
it was. What I learned after I got to college was in those sessions that we were learning, the theory was there. See, they want you to talk in a different kind of language.
And if I may interject here, you kind of started. You were at the forefront of a trend because you started college in your 40s.
You would have these people who say, well, why are you here, or what are you doing, or whatever, and I said, well, I'm sitting in these same classes like you, mm-hmm. and I'm taking these tests like you, and I'm writing these papers like you. Mm-hmm. So don't assume that I don't have a brain. Don't assume.
And were there mentors? I can think of one that you talked about fondly, two of them as a matter of fact. Peter Nazareth?
Yes.
How was he your mentor?
Idi Amin had pushed him out of Give Me the Country. But they pushed all the Indian people out. Mm-hmm. So he got to Iowa, Uganda. And he taught Elvis. Peter Nazareth taught Peter Jenkins. The studios came into our classroom to hear his take on Elvis.
And he was in East Indian man
What we
from
would say.
probably Uganda, which I think
Uganda.
which
Uganda.
is
That's right.
teaching in Iowa
That's right.
City.
That's right.
One of your mentors.
Right. Right. But that was later. But Detroit was, Motown came. I wasn't really fond of Motown, but that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But I can remember hearing them when they said that they stood on the street corner and harmonized songs.
Mm-hmm.
I remember those songs that they harmonized. Smokey, and all of them were there. And they would do a cappella on the street corners, and then Stevie Wonder lived a half a block from me.
On Breckenridge.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And he used to come and beat on the garbage cans, the drum, and we would call the police. It was so
But they
bad.
say you're not a star in your own neighborhood. You're always
Right.
like the boys. I remember your mother talking about Garvey, Marcus Garvey, Return to Africa, Return to Liberia, Monrovia, whatever. And then I remember your father being a little bit obsessed on washing his cars. It was part of his ritual.
Well, men, many men, particularly that generation, a car becomes a status symbol.
Yeah, because you couldn't buy a home.
Right.
Because of redlining and whatever.
What they do now when they do commercials, the guy's driving around, he's got this car that's shining, and the women go, woo, 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 come on. Because they know the way
That's
to a
not how it
man.
was.
Well, they say the way to a
That's
man's
what I
heart
was
is through
taught.
his stomach. The way to a man's heart, the way to a man's pocketbook is through his car.
Okay.
You come out of the womb driving. And when people say they don't have a car,
Yeah, you do get side-eyed in Detroit.
and you
Probably
said you
still in
go, this is
2022.
your boyfriend, and he's coming over here on the bus. Child, you need to rethink that. Because jazz was so segregated. The men played. But what they don't know is even Duke Ellington's sister, I think her name was Blanche, women had bands. And they generally come from men who had made it, and they played the music. But what people don't know is it was the mothers, the aunts, the females who worked the jobs that the men who were creating all that brilliance didn't have to work. Thelonious Monk never had it out.
Yeah.
But we knew those stories, and we knew that the women were school trained. They could read music. Armstrong could not read music when he came on. His wife taught him how to read. So anyway.
And so you talk about Detroit in the mid-20th century, pre-integration as electric. You had very different experiences, Jelani, growing up. So how do you see, your career at CBS and the fact that, we have conversations about Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes, and so can you make some associations between the electricity that your grandmother speaks to what you sense about Kansas City and any mentors that you may or may not have?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think for me, growing up in Kansas City, I think growing up in Kansas City, for me, it was, it's been increasingly humbling. The people here, as they say about people in the Midwest, are salt of the earth. I get that so much being in New York. But it's really true. There's a community here. There's a je ne sais quoi that I feel. There's a spirit that I have when I come back home. And I think some of that is, a pace that is comfortable to me. It's something that I feel in my soul. But when I was younger and moving to Princeton, I think what you're kind of alluding to, in conjunction with what my granny was talking about, growing up in a space, I grew up in a lot of white spaces where I was just kind of the only black kid, either in a higher level learning class or just on the soccer field. So my mentors, unbeknownst to me, were my parents. As a kid, growing up, you just view your parents as kind of just guardians, and the rest of the time you just want to play with your friends and grow up and have a lot of fun. My parents instilled a lot of knowledge that I wasn't getting from schools. So I wasn't disillusioned about, what my skin color represented and the spaces that I was entering. They, you did an incredible job of letting me still grow and be a child, while also giving me important skills that taught me how to maneuver and grow while still being able to be a kid and find my own path. And it wasn't always perfect. I think I had some issues with class because as a lower, we're lower middle class black kid in Princeton, New Jersey. We had I had the smallest place out of all my friends, and then I'd be invited to these McMansions where you have to drive a mile to even get to the house. Literally on the way you'd see deer, and there's tennis courts and basketball courts. So to go from that, I'd sleep over there, and then to come home. I know there was some, I had some class issues for sure, wondering why we didn't have what they had, or were my parents less than because their parents could provide X. And just through the parenting, I was able to truly understand what we were dealing with as a black man, as a black child, and what I needed to do to be successful. So I think while your mentorship was a city of people that look like you, I think for
that
me,
was important.
yeah, which is super important. It's why I live in Harlem right now, because there's people that look like me.
That's
In New
great.
York, it's huge. I didn't really get that experience growing up, even though all my friends and people close to me are, I have a great mix of friends, but a lot of them, closest friends, happen to be black, even though I grew up in these white spaces. My mentors growing up I had to be my parents. I wouldn't be where I am today, or wouldn't be who I am without that guidance at such an early age.
Thank you, because part of what Tavish and I, our intention, one of our intentions is to use our raw material as a way for us to not only frame our stories, but could you imagine understanding you've got an ego that recognizes our separate bodies and intellect, and our architect is our mental self, and then you have this soul that is interconnected by our roots. Because you can remember, I couldn't even remember if we were thinking about Alex Haley and Roots in the 1977, 1978, and how we rushed home to see it, or the Cosby Show, different things that showed a certain experience, a shared experience. And now we have a holiday that represents our independence, June 19th. How do you see this as aspirational, or can we even integrate June 19th into our conversations? And because I mean, part of this, another reason we're doing this is to show how to get our raw material to work for you on a day-to-day basis. These conversations we have at our home all the time, being understanding that every moment from the soul's perspective is about our evolution. So where do you see us needing to evolve? Dr. Cherry, Mr. Rooks?
Well, I we're rerunning this, but the thing was that there was a young man I met at the June 10th at the house, and we were talking about, what was it, 2.5 years before blacks knew that they were free, and I said, wow. And then I remember, and I didn't bring it up before, but that movie Underground, where one of the scenes in it was, this is going north now to freedom, and they put bodies of people hung from trees down this long thing to show you, this is in the north now, to show you how free you really were. And that movie blew. I had to stop.
So you're talking about the show that was on Prime?
Right,
Underground. Yeah,
right.
It was a series.
Barry Jenkins,
Barry Jenkins,
supported by Britt. What's his name? Brad Pitt was the producer.
One executive.
And what you find out is it wasn't wonderful going north, because we were segregated in Detroit. And that worked for the time that it worked. And this young man said to me just a couple of days ago, Cherry, some of those people never knew that they were free.
What seeds would you like to plant about people's ignorance regarding some of the things we're talking about with mentors, and your experience at Princeton, your experience in Detroit?
you talk about the soul. So I mean, just taking kind of a step back, because you were talking about, how do we juxtapose Juneteenth with Independence Day and the 4th of July. My ideas on what we need to do for Juneteenth is a whole that'd be a whole longer thing. But I do, in order to make it through, to find common ground, which is where I think something like where Ourrawmaterials would be so great, is you need people almost not of equal footing or equal place, but a equal spiritual kind of development in order to partake in something. So I think people undertaking similar spiritual and emotional growth, something like doing Ourrawmaterials and all the weekly lessons and workshops that you're both doing, would be helpful, because you're almost working at the same thing, the soul. You want to fix the soul. You want to work towards being intentional with a lot of the lessons that you're talking about. And I think that common ground is important, and hopefully as a society we can get to a place where people want to do the work internally, and they're not stimulated by everything that's going on outside. You're black, you're white, you're this, you're rich, you're poor. Hopefully we can get to a point where the common ground is we're all working on our soul to be better as a people.
All right, I can put some seeds onto that. You got anything else over there, Doctor?
Yeah, I do. Education and church and a lot of the institutions have given us many of the institutions, let's put it that way, we've been programmed to think this is the best way to do something. And so what I would hope to be able to do with younger people, or anybody, that you have to learn to think critically, because we're all subject to programming. I mean, we can all sit. That's why when I was segregated in Detroit and we couldn't get out, we wouldn't have said, nobody even cared whether we had a school. Nobody even cared, other than you had a message that was bigger than you. It wasn't taught us, so we were less likely to be programmed. But now that you have so much abundance, a car is a status symbol. So I would like to be able to see somebody more talk about the programming and how we're programming our children.
So part of the Ourrawmaterial is the demystification or the simplification.
Simplification, and teach people how to think about things.
Because if you talk about our mental self, okay, and then which typically comes from our mentors. Whether or not the food is on the table, whether or not the parent has the money for the food, whether, all of that. So the mentors, and this is why this is just lovely to have both of you two here, is to understand that, as you said, you may have been segregated, but it was separate and equal.
That's right.
That it wasn't the separate but equal. It was actually, there was an equality that was there, even if you didn't have the same opportunities.
Right.
And so now we're at a stage where we can have a whole holiday. They can say my Independence Day, which I'm talking aspirationally still, because there hasn't really been any systems set up. But I think but we learn to want to integrate into a system based on some of the messages we get or don't get from our mentors.
Okay.
So when we think about our rootedness and our soul and our interconnectedness as families, as community, one of the things that Tavish and I really, really would enjoy seeing is not only it being in schools, but being in healthcare centers or in spiritual centers or in places where you might not have these conversations unless a safe space is created.
That's right.
For you to have it.
That's right.
So yes, should there be a spiritual whatever, but it's important not to get lofty about that and just say, come as you are. And that's a statement, and I think Patti LaBelle has a song called Come As You Are, and it speaks specifically to showing up at church as you are. That you don't have to put on your Sunday best. It's more important that you show up. So Ourrawmaterial mentors, you two showed up. Tavish and I are over the effing moon that you're doing this. And like I said earlier, my heart is full. Mi corazón es lleno. I don't have any words. You have anything to add for the future?
In
Or?
fact, I was just reading an article to say your oppression has given you insights that people who don't have it, they don't even think you have it. You know, they don't even understand it. Even some of your own people in your own ethnicity, you know, they've never not had it. It isn't that I want people to go around and not have it, but you do need to know